I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for sparing us a little bit of time today. My name is Richard Marler. I am Head of Business Development at Time Technology. Time Technologies based in or near Guildford in Surrey. And joining me today is Francie Tanner, who is Director of Panagenda, and she is based in South Carolina. So in terms of just a little bit of context background for this, I was reading a piece on Domino version 10 recently and saw in there that Lotus Notes is now just approaching 30 years old, which is really pretty amazing. There are very few pieces of software that have extended a life anywhere similar to that. I suspect some of the audience today, myself and certainly Time Technology, have been involved with Lotus Notes for much of that 30-year period, which is equally amazing, but also slightly scary, I think. One of the challenges presented by having such a long lifespan is the proliferation of applications. And it's fair to say that most of our customers struggle to get a decent grasp on their Lotus Notes application estate. That can mean understanding what applications you have, what those applications do, whether they're still being used, and if they're being used, how and by whom. The reason Time Technology has partnered with Panagenda is that we wholeheartedly believe that ApplicationInsights is the best tool for getting a handle on these applications. I'm going to give you an example after Francie's done a little demonstration and talk that will really put that into context. I believe that information, or what you're going to learn about how to gather that information today, should be important for any of the organizations, and looking through the attendees, I think there are ones that fit into any of the following categories. They're ones that are either looking to improve performance or reduce cost on their existing Domino infrastructure. They might be looking to Domino version 10 but don't want to take a load of old baggage with them. Or you might be looking at modernization or even migration away from the platform altogether. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Francie to give you an introduction to Panagenda and ApplicationInsights, and then I'll pick up at the end. Thanks, Francie.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard, and thank you for having me. Let's jump right in. So what is this all about? Like Richard said, most of us, and I've been in this business for 21 years of those 30 as well myself, which is crazy. But most of us, and actually this isn't necessarily Notes specific or Notes and Domino specific, but with time, it's kind of like your closet or the garage of your house. Stuff accumulates. People have built applications for a very, very valuable reason at the time that, now just nobody can remember or knows what that is. So what this is all about is helping you understand, first of all, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're talking transformation, migration, just optimization, what is it that is not actually being used at all? Which applications can literally just go away and nothing would happen? Let's start there, right? So reducing the scope of daily operations is one of the biggest benefits that ApplicationInsights provide. And then of the remaining applications that are used, let's take a look at those and run design analytics and see what do we need to do about that. And some customers we work with already have their mind made up, right? Let's say they're already migrating to Microsoft, let's just say, which is fine. So knowing what the goal is, looking at the code is very helpful in figuring out how to minimize spending time and money on that, right? We can reveal, as I'll show you, what kind of code doesn't translate well, what kinds of apps do you need to touch, what kind of apps actually would probably be better to just put, make them web-enabled and surface those via a browser. Or maybe you're, like Richard said, you're looking at modernization, you're looking at 10. What would that actually mean? What do we need to do to modernize applications that are truly being used by the organization? So that's what ApplicationInsights does. It improves security, risk, But essentially, at the end of the day, it reduces scope and cost of any kind of transformation, as we like to call it. So I'm not going to talk too much about the pictures in these slides because I'm just going to show you the actual appliance. But the questions here are absolutely what our customers are asking us for. And on some of those I'm paraphrasing. Which applications have a high cost to benefit ratio? Meaning, which applications have incredibly complex code, but there's really not a lot of people using them anymore? Which applications aren't used at all and can be archived, right? Which can be easily modernized or web-enabled? And sometimes it matters who is using applications, so which users and departments use a particular application. Having 5 people in some, 5 data entry clerks use an application versus 5 executives, obviously is a very different situation on how to, what to do with that particular application. And which applications have code dependencies, which is very important, of course, when you're, let's say if you're migrating somewhere, which servers have built-in DLLs or things that need to be ported or functionality that has to be replicated. Which code isn't compatible with web devices or whatever. Which applications contain similar code, and that's actually one of my favorite features because it's, a lot of this is information that customers with Domino applications have never seen before, because Domino is notoriously horrible at visualizing anything, but not only does the similarity feature show which databases are actually 95% or more similar in code and should be treated as a set, but how are they related, which is stuff that our customers have basically never seen before. Okay, let me switch screens and there we go, jump right in. So, okay, I believe you can all see my Application Insights screen. So Application Insights is a virtualized image and comes in 3 different flavors, which basically means all you need to run it is the ability to have some kind of, VMware player, and there's other flavors of that available as well, and a Notes ID that can read. That's it. We don't make any changes. We just literally read from the environment. So I'm going to take you through probably most of these screens, and I'm not going to explain all of them in detail because the point is, what can this do for you? Is this appropriate for you to use within your organization? So what Application Insights does is it scans hundreds of pieces of information around every single application instance, so including replicas, which can be different from each other, right, within the organization. Application Insights is focused on anything but mail, essentially. So it's mail and databases, and I'll show you that on the next screen, what all that covers. But obviously, we know about all databases, but Application Insights specifically was meant to help people get started with their modernization or optimization types of projects. So on the bar, we talk about how many databases instances there even are, how many are used, or in this case, used within the last 90 days. In red-orange is how many databases Application Insights is focusing on. So what we're talking about, the difference between 3,100 and 469 databases is things like mail and archives, for example. So how many of the actual applications that exist in our environment, by the way, this is our panagenda environment, so this is real data, but we don't have tens of thousands of apps, as you can tell, but out of those applications that we have, how many of those have been used in the last 90 days, which is, that percentage starts looking a little better, right? So there's lots of other users. That's a good one, actually, because what often happens, those of you familiar with the IBM renewal process, typically the renewals aren't necessarily done based on real information, but how many actual active users do you have? So in our case, we have 157 registered users, but we actually only 43% of those are active or alive, which means if you're paying for 157 licenses, for example. That's definitely overkill. And also if you're looking to recreate this or port this to another environment, knowing how many active users can be helpful as well. So just a little overview on the Sintra page, user activity. All these things are interactive and can be sorted. So how much web usage do we have, client usage, around focus databases, which again are apps and mail-in databases. Over time, because knowing if they're used in the last 90 days is great, but in the last year, in the last 30 days, which are all very detailed metrics we can drill in on, but on here they're just sort of summarized. So I don't care about other databases. So within focus databases, how many have been used to read from? How many have been used to read and write from, which obviously if you have databases that are only read, web enabling those is, piece of cake, I'll just say, a technical term by the way, and which ones of those are being written to, which is maybe a little bit of a different situation when you're talking about modernizing or migrating those apps. Design impact, we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So we have 7 different levels, sort of, and that the way these are calculated are based on like 27 factors or something like that. But the short version of that is we have exceptionally complex databases, very high complex, high, medium, and low. And this is a fairly typical picture, by the way, that we see at customers. So, one of the questions we get asked all the time is, well, how complex would this be, or how much would this take? How much time would this take to recreate in a different, let's say in Salesforce or something like that, for which you need to know how complex applications are. So that's a little overview. And again, all of these things are drilled down, and you can get lots more information. Okay. Moving on to the environment overview, just a quick picture. Again, I mentioned earlier that Domino historically isn't great about visualizing things. So this is just I call this kind of a management overview of how many active users do you actually have versus registered users, how many ACL entries, how many groups, how many used views. And you probably all know if you have views but they're not used, well, that's a good indication of a database not being used, right? How many servers are in the environment? So this is kind of like, tell me about my Domino environment kind of thing. Quick inventory slide. I mentioned earlier that we have the ability to collect data from all databases in existence. So that's applications, mail-in databases, orphaned mail files, system databases, mail, mailboxes, and directories. But ApplicationInsights is focused only on apps and mail-in databases because those are the difficult ones to port. So what does that look like across our environment, database instances? How many replica sets do we have? And how much disk space is used up by those? And then obviously if we have 20% usage on something like 35 gigabytes, that's a lot of space that you can be saving to not have to, you can, a lot of our customers even manage to, they start any project out with optimization where they go down to, they reduce their server count by 60%, let's say, and then look at, okay, where are we going to go from here? So immediate cost savings is definitely what can come out of this. Okay, looking at the next section, the catalog, I'm just going to open, and there's a gazillion pages in here. I'm just going to open the contacts database because I know that's a really reliable, good example. So all these are drilled down like in every other part of ApplicationInsights. I'm just going to explain the particular views, and there's so much to this. I could literally talk for 4 hours, which I won't, by the way. So within the details of each application, it talks about the specifics, like which replica are we talking about on which server, how many active users have been there recently, how is this used, so just client or web and rich client, How does this rank in usage and design complexity in the last 90 days? There's lots of technical information, so size. There's some great information on views I'll show you. How is this replicated at ACLs? Lots of great information. Views, I mentioned, that's actually kind of important because they take up a lot of space, and if they're not used, then this database probably doesn't need to exist, which in our case most of them are. But which views exactly are used, right? Which for if you were trying to recreate this maybe in another language, that would matter. User activity, tell me more about that in the last, I don't want to just know about the last 90 days, but the last 30 days, 7 days, the last year. What do those sessions look like? So we talked a little bit about read and write and how you can draw a lot of conclusions, or you make some decisions, I should say, based on whether a database is only read from and what you do with that in the future. That makes things a lot easier, actually. And then we also surface, I brought up how it may be important who's using it. We bring that up by department. And the reason, so of course we have the actual, the user data exists in the data warehouse, but the reason that we, by default, use departments and we only surface, I believe it's 3 users or more, and we don't name names, we obfuscate them by default, is because of legislation that exists in Germany, I believe France as well. So anyone that gets an eval license or whatever, we can unobfuscate all this information and we can surface usernames, but the way we set it up was meant to protect customers from accidentally breaking laws by installing our software, which seems like a great thing to do. But the point is, we can tell you who is using which applications, right? Which very much matters. Understanding, again, Richard said some of these applications have existed for 10, 20, 30 years, so it's not like you can necessarily go back and go, why was this created? So understanding who is using it is very helpful down to the actual user level. Design complexity, I'm not going to spend too much time, but what exactly is in the code of this application? What is it made of? Views, agents, forms, how many lines of code? And essentially what we do, what ApplicationInsights does, is it takes the entire application landscape and translates it into XML. So for those of you that that means anything, that should explain what exactly that means. But essentially, what is in your data warehouse. By the way, the ApplicationInsights installs on premises on your site, and that's it, the end. There's none of this data gets sent to Panagenda or IBM or Time Technologies or anything like that, right? This is an on-premises installation. All this data is collected in your own data warehouse that doesn't go anywhere. But so essentially what we do is we turn your code into XML, which basically means anything you could possibly be looking for within the code or your application developers could possibly be looking for is captured in the data warehouse. So tell me where there are hard-coded server names, for example. Tell me where there are DLL dependencies. Those are all things that we can surface. Okay, last tab in here, Design Insights. So we have, and I'll show you the bigger list here. This is just the very specific list for that one database. But we have several categories of issues that we surface. So on web design for this particular database, there's some code that is not supported on the web, in case you wanted to do that, right? There's code that has to interact with the rich client. So if you wanted to web enable this database, anything in red is definitely an issue. There's also some mail dependencies in here, by the way. There's encryption. So if you're going to take this to a different platform, there's a few things that you would need to plan around. So, and we talk about, there's, I think, see some categories of stuff that we surface within those categories. Things like rich client dependencies, what could easily go to the web, what can easily be modernized or not. And I'll show you the bigger picture, like the overall picture, in just a minute. Okay, moving on to usage, and I can already tell we're going to run out of time. So what we'll do, by the way, I'll send, Richard will have both the recording and the slides that have all the screenshots in here, so in case I skip past something that you're like, oh wait, I wanted to see that. We'll take care of that after the webinar. But on usage, we surface that in a number of ways. So one is complexity versus sessions, which is really important because if a database is not actually used, then who cares how complex it is, right? Essentially is what this is saying. So this is saying, just show me the databases that are actually really complex and actually used, right? And you can, all of these are, drill down. You could click on here and then go to the, whoops. Okay, yes, you could. You click on here. Oh, it took me out of full screen. Okay, that's fine. And go back to that detailed view that I showed you a minute ago. We also surface web versus client usage. So again, if you were just looking to maybe web enable some databases, we can show you what is already used on the web, and you can tell that we actually barely use anything on the web in our case. Which databases are used by the rich client. You can also look at this, again, turning off mail-in databases or whatever it is that you're looking to focus on. Okay, quick word on design, and then my favorite feature, similarity. So design complexity, we talked about that in the sense of the individual database. This is the overall landscape. So we have over 10, we'll round up, 11 million lines of code in our environment. And again, we're a fairly small company, not that many applications in the grand scheme of things. So this is, there's a lot of business assets actually that we have in our environment, that you have in your environment. What of that is actually important that you should be spending time or money on? So looking at, okay, my favorite feature, similarity. So while you're working through this process of what do I actually care about, what should I invest in, what am I doing with this whole thing, with this whole can of worms, a really important thing to know is, well, which databases are actually similar or the same, which, there's no built-in ways of knowing that. So what we provide here is we analyze which databases share more than 95% of their DNA, essentially, their code base, which basically means that these 47 databases here are 100% identical. Okay, so this problem, the scope of what am I going to do with this whole thing, has just kind of been decreased by 47 databases because they're all the same. So we can count them as, any code changes I would make there will apply to 47 databases as well. So not only does it tell you which those 47 databases are, which the 27 databases are, but how are they related? And I think this is the one that's a great example. So how are they related? Because typically what this means is there'll be a template, for example, or an application that has a different kind of selection criteria or replica on another server, right? So what are those databases that are related? What are they? Where are they? Again, all this is drilled down. I'm not going to click on it now, but you could click on all these and get to that same detailed screen that I showed you earlier. Okay, skipping right ahead before handing back over to Richard. The last thing I wanted to share is, no, I want to go back because I told you I would, to the big insight screen. Okay, so I talked earlier about dependencies and things that we surfaced. So this is, what I showed you earlier was specific to that database, This one is specific to your entire environment. So what specific code findings that we flagged as you may want to know about are in the entire environment. So which databases have, which applications have dependencies on other databases, which have operating system dependencies, mail dependencies, things like that. And again, you can drill down on all those and look at them specifically. Okay, last thing. Beside all this kind of pre-canned, hey, you may want to know about this, we also give you the ability to create your custom insights, because maybe you're doing something specific, like you're going to the IBM cloud or some other cloud. What are specific things you may care about as part of that? So you can essentially build, you can use our own issues that we've kind of flagged and build your own, so have your developers add to that. Or you can also just do a plain full text search across your entire environment for literally anything, a specific server name that you believe, that you saw was hard-coded somewhere, or maybe somebody's name, right? So there's things like turnover, security, regulations, all kinds of stuff. Anything that you want to search within your code base, you can do from in here. Okay, so that was the super quick version of Application Insights, a quick demo. And with that, I will hand back to Richard.
Okay, thanks, Francie. That was an enormous amount of information in a very short period of time, so thank you for holding that together. I have one question for you before I just close up. What sort of impact does this have on the servers? So this is running all the time. How much of an impact is it having?
Right. So the answer, of course, like with just about anything technologically, is it depends. But what we do is let's say a customer has 400 servers and tens of thousands of apps, right? So what we do is we break that down into segments. So each day, and actually more specifically each night. So we calculate, because we know what's used and when, we calculate when are your low usage. When does a server have capabilities is maybe a better way of saying it. And then we scan a segment of your application during that time. So when your server is busy, we don't do anything. We don't read anything. But we break it down into segments either way, which means you may see information trickling in depending on the size of the environment over a couple of days. So you're not going to install this and see everything all at once, right? But this is designed to be minimally intrusive, and we have customers that have 150,000 users and tens of thousands of apps running this.
Okay, and just to reiterate, the customer data always stays on site. It never comes off site.
Absolutely. Yep, okay. Correct. And nothing interacts with the appliance from externally.
All right, I said at the beginning that I wanted to use a couple of examples. There's a feature in there that that Francie showed with regards to used and unused views. Time Technology are focusing a lot at the moment on companies moving away from the platform, migrating or modernizing. And that, as a single sweep of analysis, is an incredibly useful tool for us, because it gives us a much more realistic view of how much it's going to cost to migrate a database. When we look at database complexity and so forth, if it's just a report on lines of code, these can really be very misleading. As anyone that's done notes development knows, there'll be lots of copies of documents or forms, lots of copies of views that are just not being used. So that's one really useful feature. The other example I just wanted to give is that we ran Application Insights in our own environment, which is now remotely hosted. And I think it was a bit shocking to everyone that of the some 450 databases that we have on there, taking up quite a considerable amount of storage, only 4% of them had been used in the last 12 months. So we're currently going through quite a significant cost-saving exercise by literally removing those, archiving those databases off, so therefore reducing the amount of storage we're having. So with that, I am going to wrap it up because we're running out of time. As you can see on screen, what I'm going to do is I'll contact everyone individually just to get some feedback and see if it's of interest. If you're currently under Domino support, then there's an entitlement offer that allows you a free 50 database instance license, which we can discuss. Anyone not still under support, Time Technology is able to offer an evaluation license that will start to provide some really useful information and get a conversation started with what you're looking at. So both of those, as it says at the bottom there, are a zero risk, low cost way to start investigating the capabilities of AI. I'm going to wrap it up there because we're half an hour through. I want to thank Francie for her time, a really interesting session, and I will catch up with everyone shortly.